And let's go ahead and taste this wine. I've missed slurping on the air. That's one of my favorite things to do. That. Why do we do that? We pull that air across our palate to give the wine some aromatics. It's literally like swirling it in your mouth. So if you like to slurp your soup, your noodles, or whatever, do it with your wine too. It always helps bring everything out. What's interesting about this wine is it actually has some texture. It's got some richness to it. And based on the fact that I'm not picking up anything that gives me an oak cue, I would probably associate that with lees contact or something like that, or maybe even some skin contact in a form where they're pulling things out to pull up stuff. It's a little bit phenolic, which does lead me to believe that it does have a little bit of skin contact on it. And all those sort of flavors that we talked about before are echoed. What I'm not picking up here is any oak. What I am picking up here, particularly in the palate, not so much the nose, are some soil elements. I'm getting definitely inorganic earth here. It definitely comes off as being sort of granitic-y, slaty, schisty, something there, but it's definitely strong and pronounced. I am getting some sort of, again, not only the textural notes, but I am getting a little bit of that sort of peanut shelly, leesy kind of thing, which echoes the thing of the richness I picked up in the nose. The alcohol on the wine is not particularly hot, so my palate's not warm. The weight on the wine is probably somewhere in the medium body range, perhaps echoed by like I said, lees and all that, but it's not super alcoholic, and I know that because my chest isn't burning up right now. Finish on the wine is moderate. It's solid, and the acid on it is balanced. It's not super acidic, but nevertheless, it's appropriate for the wine style, which I think is quite interesting. And varietally, although I think I've got a pretty good clue as to what this is by all the cues I'm giving you, I guess we're not going to know what it is until we know what it is. So on that note, start getting in your brain where you're thinking.
You would love to see, yeah, I just said.
I was about to do that. I was giving you the heavy dramedy, Meg. Here we go. Let's go, folks. Here we are. Oh, we're going to Portugal, and we're going to the old world. We're going to an area called the Minho, and specifically to the appellation of Vinho Verde, and specifically to a particular estate that you can see there on your map called Quinta do Rogueiro. And Quinta do Rogueiro is actually leading producer in the Minho, in Vinho Verde. And where is that? Precisely, if you look at the map here, you'll see on the left-hand side a map of Spain and Portugal together. Spain is really big. Portugal's not that big. So if you can imagine, Spain is like Pac-Man or Pac-Woman eating this little fruit that is Spain, because Spain literally has water to its west, but everything to its east is incorporated essentially by Spanish. So there's actually Spain to the north of you, Spain to the south of you. But up in that northwest corner, as you see the arrow going across to the right-hand side, you do have Vinho Verde. And Vinho Verde literally is green. Verde means green in Portugal, or verde if you were in Brazil. And it's green here not because the wines are green, or not because the area itself is green, but it really speaks to the youth, to the green, the culture, to all that there, and not necessarily to green wine. It's really more about the youthfulness of everything. It's a pretty cool area. It's known for its white wines, more so than its red wines, although if you've ever had any lovely vinhão made into red Vinho Verde, they actually make more Vinho Verde red than they do white, which is a factoid that you can add to your list of Portuguese factoids. And going into where we are here, as we said before, this is from the Quinta do Rogueiro. The wine is called Secreto, which literally means secret. And you'll see that line underneath Secreto that it says maceração pellicular, which means literally skin contact. And this is in Alvarinho. Monção and Melgaço is the subzone within Vinho Verde, which is particularly well known for Alvarinho, from which this wine emanates. So it's a 2019 vintage. You know, we would give you some credit if you're doing it online for 18, because again, it's not so bright because of the structure and the lees contact and the skin contact that would give you a sense that it was 2018, but we'd give you a little half credit there. It's Alvarinho, it's Old World, it's Portugal, it's Minho, and it's Vinhos Verdes. That's the plural of that. And before I get into anything more specific, Tim, what are your thoughts when you tasted this wine?
And Evan, you got to breathe a little bit. We had some.
No, I get enthused. I haven't done this for a while. Let's do this for fun.
So for the next wine, for those of you who are saying go a little slower, we will give you some time before we reveal, and we will make sure that we breathe a little bit.
We'll slow
Tim,
the
I'll
dirt
let you.
bike down a little bit.
Evan went from 0 to 200 miles per hour. I love it. Now, Evan, before we go to Tim, just 2 quick questions. Is it common for Vinho Verde to have a little bubble? Someone is saying there's a little bit of bubble. And number 2, is Alvarinho peachy?
Yeah. Okay. First question first, second question second. Yes, it is common for Alvarinho or Alvarinho, either one, the Spanish version being Alvarinho, this one being Alvarinho from Portugal, to have a little spritz. That's because it is pretty much bottled right out of tank directly into the bottle, and it preserves the carbon dioxide that would be there, normally a little bit to do that. So if it prickles your tongue, that's natural. There's a lot of very inexpensive Vinho Verde, Alvarinho, that's made by actually injecting carbon dioxide into the wine so that it's particularly prickly to the palate. So it can either be natural in a very docile form, or it can be aggressive in the injected form. As to peachy, one of the key flavors, one of the marker flavors for all Alvarinho, or again, Alvarinho, if you happen to be in Spain, would be stone fruit, of which peach, plum, apricot, and nectarine would be those primary stone fruits. Yeah. All right. I'm sorry for going so fast, but I love this wine. Just got excited. Tim, what did you find when you tried the wine?
I think the problem, Evan, is like you and I are like professional Instacart shoppers, and we've been in a store like shopping for people for like a month. And so we know where everything is. And so we've got the shopping list and we do it all in about 5 minutes. So we will endeavor to slow down. Okay. For me, this hits all the high points for Alvarinho/Alvarinho, in that we've got flowers, we have lees contact, the creaminess, peanut shell thing you mentioned. We have phenolic bitterness, we have no oak, we have some mineral there, and some elevated acidity. And I love the peach call. I think that's one of the first fruits that I smelled and tasted. So, it checks all the boxes for the grape variety. Yeah.
Yeah. Great. This is just a couple of notes as we look at some pictures of the property here. This property was essentially established in 1988. It was literally one vineyard at the time. The first vintage was in 1999, and they've grown over time. This entire, look at the little castle thing in the middle. The remaining stuff around it is not obviously all the winery as well too, but they're really known for their Alvarinho and their Loureiro. They do a blend of Alvarinho and Loureiro as well. And I think it's very classic of what's going on here. When you are searching out Alvarinho from this part of the world, make sure you are purchasing from the sub-appellations, as we saw earlier, of Monção and Melgaço underneath there. That is the area for which Alvarinho can be bottled as a variety, cannot be labeled Alvarinho. Actually, now it can. That law changed this year. But typically, Alvarinhos and the highest quality Alvarinhos come from this area. And what else can I tell you about this property? They do just a lovely job, and they're extremely consistent. This is some pictures of some Alvarinho grapes there. You can see that they're picked in little lug boxes, and you can see what's most notably, you're probably thinking, is that a tree? What the hell's going on there in that right-hand picture? And in fact, that is a very fertile pergola. So what they literally do traditionally is they grow the vines up high and they trellis them across for 2 reasons. Number one, the fruit can dangle and it's easier to pick. But number 2, traditionally, as a lot of these people have small properties, it's not unusual for people to, have a couple of vines in their yard and pick their fruit and then sell it to a co-op or a quinta in this case. But what they used to do is they use the land underneath for growing other vegetables. So it gives you literally twice the productivity on your land that you would be if you just had a traditional vineyard with vines that were close to the ground. So this is a particularly fertile vine, but you also need, as you raise up into the pergola, to protect your fruit against the sun. So that's kind of cool.
Yeah. Yeah, but also doesn't it tend to be pretty humid there, and so you need air circulation. So yes. You don't, yeah.
Yeah, this is very true, because if not, you could get molds and things like that. But it's interesting, if you go to the Mino these days, there's very much of a struggle philosophically about whether to go more modern techniques and simply open up the canopy by vertical shoot positioning and stuff like that, or to use the traditional techniques here. I think the romance makes us love the pergolas. I think that people would tell you that by opening up the canopy and giving the fruit better, you're getting more stuff there. So nevertheless, quite interesting, delicious version. And I would tell people, though, that if you're thinking that this level of richness, this level of creaminess is typical of Alvarinho, I would tell you it's probably only at one end. Most of them tend to be clean, bright, a little bit prickly, delightful with seafood and all this, but this sort of richer, complex, dare I say, more Burgundian style almost of an Alvarinho, or Alvarinho in this case, is relatively recent and led by people who are doing that style. So
Evan, there is a question here from Lisa. So what is that distinction between Albarino and Alvarinho, if we were to sum it up?
Yeah, so Albarino with a B is going to come from the Spanish side of the river in Rias Baixas, further to north. Alvarinho with a V is going to come from the other side of the river, from Portugal in the south. Because of the river splitting there and the differences in climate, Albarinios tend to be richer, rounder wines. Alvarinhos tend to, again, absent skin contact and things like that, tend to be a little bit brighter, crisper, sharper.
Great, awesome. All right, now we can go on to the next.
Vinho dos, Tim.
Vinho dos. Okay, now for something completely different, everybody. So we've got white wine number 2. In comparison, the wine is generally a little bit lighter in color. My particular glass, and those of you who have the kit today may agree, it's got some little bubbles in it. And again, Evan just mentioned dissolved CO2 in some form or another. Either left over from malolactic, or sometimes wineries will inject CO2 as a preservative when they're bottling. But beyond that, if I tilt the glass forward, there's actually tartrates. So there's a lot of little tartrate crystals, which are about the size of grains of sand. Okay, what does that mean? It means that the tartaric acid in this wine is so high that some of it is precipitated out as tartrates. Yeah.
It's not fingernail clippings or ground glass. I've seen that on emails coming through.
No. We're just going to filter all the comments I had. Okay. As to what a wine looks like, it is a medium straw. There's definitely some green, the green pointing to a cool climate and relatively youthful. And actually the lightness color pointing to the fact, and we'll discover this pretty quickly, that there's no oak aging on this wine, no extended skin contact, no botrytis, no extended leach contact either. So there's nothing that has to do with oxidation, and the wine's fairly young. Okay. And then on the nose, the main event. All right, so there's quite a bit going on here, and I'll just start at the top. So the wine is, it's got, for me, and I'm sensitive to sulfur dioxide, it's got a little bit of sulfur on it, not too much. From there, it is youthful, but I would say there's some development happening. In terms of how the fruit breaks down, there's definitely your orchard type fruit. There is both green and probably red apple, something along Fuji. There is citrus fruit. There is both some tart and kind of sweet citrus. So I think there's, lime and Meyer lemon. Definitely some tropical fruit. Pineapple for me is the main event there. And then some stone fruit. This is very peachy, and even a little apricot. So that's interesting here. You've got all 4 of the major fruit groups. The only thing we don't have is melon, which is kind of like the training wheel off to the side there. We've got everything else. In terms of fruit ripeness or quality, we've got a pretty diverse range here. We've got some fairly ripe fruit, but overall everything tends to be tart and underripe, especially in the citrus category, and even in the peach. What else? For a non-fruit thing, we've got, of course, some flowers. And everybody, if you're looking for flowers, they're always going to be above the glass. And here, I don't think these are like the Alvarinho that we just have, which are terpenes, right? I think these are more fermentation type aromas. It smells like lime blossoms. Very pretty top note. And again, it's pretty subtle, but it's definitely there. Now, there are a few other things. There's a little verbena and lemongrass, but generally speaking, in the herbal range, there's not a lot. Okay. What there is and what dominates the nose and the palate of the wine is the whole earth, mineral, and other, that whole realm. And to me, there is some like whetstones in here. There's some mushroom and earth character, but there's also the fusel, gasoline, petrol thing going on, which is, you know, anything about that impact compound that immediately takes you to a grape or a small family of grapes. Okay, so I think that's really important. All right, and I'm going to taste it really quickly. Just confirming again, and I didn't think so, there's no oak on the wine. So this wine was probably done in stainless steel. If it was done in oak, it's the neutral uprights, Foudre, or whatever they are, that are probably very old, and they don't impart influence, but maybe they impart a rounded texture. But this wine strikes me as being very pure and very streamlined and like it was done in stainless steel. Okay, everything that I tasted is there. What is stronger for me is that middle sense of earth and mineral, which really drives the finish of the wine, and that petrol fusel thing. And I'll say something about that at the end. In terms of the wine's structure, the wine is dry. It is, you know, the acid, I would say, is beyond medium plus. It's headed towards high. The alcohol may be medium. I mean, for me, probably on the bottle reads 12.5, something like that, maybe 13%. The alcohol is really restrained. And all of that, you know, the acid and alcohol together here just speaks to a, relatively speaking, cooler climate. Yep. Wine, again, fairly young, but developing, no phenolic bitterness, no oak, and the finish is really long and really persistent. So this is really a laser focused example of what it is. Okay, Evan, any?
Do you want me to add now, or do you want to?
Let's give everybody a moment to think through. And as we're about to reveal, I put it out there on chat. Any guesses so far? We have Lisa with the Chenin or Riesling on Old World. I did get a question that was just sent to hosts and panelists. Are there grids? We're no longer doing grids like we used to because we felt that there were too much of handcuffs and shackles on our presenters. So definitely just love to get your thoughts. A lot of Riesling.
I think though, but to add to that, the grids still are there. If you go online, you're gonna find the grids, and you can go do that. And in fact, for those of you who don't do that until you get to the day of, because you want to see us do it first, it might be worth either earlier in the day or even the day before going in and gridding the wines and maybe not hitting the reveal right away so that you get a sense of them. But don't worry about it. We still have the 3 tiers of full workout, quick picks, and reveal available to you online. So we have not eliminated grids. I just wanted to ask you, Tim, before we actually do the reveal on it, do you find similarities between wine 1 and wine 2 at all, or do they seem really different to you?
Well, to me, they're very different. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and where they're different is what I call the impact compounds. You know, wine 2 is not phenolic. If it does have lees contact, it's really minimal. Mm-hmm. The fusel petrol thing is pretty intense, especially on the palate, and it's not very floral. Mm-hmm. So even though you've got 2 unoaked white wines, they're really different animals.
Good.
Great. All right, let's go. Let's see it now.
All right, here we go. So we're starting where we were. That's an important new thing that we do, is we like to take these truly global tours by starting. So we're starting where we were at Quinta do Rogueiro in the Minho, and now we're going. We're going up in the air, and we're moving. Oof.
Here we are in Austria.
Oh.
So we're in the Comtal Valley, which is a tributary of the Danube, in the Langenloy region. And the producer here is Hiedler. And Hiedler is one of the most important producers for the Comtal. And, Hiedler, there we are. So that shows you where it is in Austria, although that looks like a Rorschach chart in color. It's technically in Niederösterreich, which translates as Lower Austria, which is kind of strange. I've never understood this because it's in northern Austria, but the Danube, as it flows to the Atlantic, it's lower, hence Niederösterreich. That's why all those regions are called that. So the Comtal, that holy trinity of the Wachau, the Comtal, and the Krimstal. The Comtal is the smallest Again, it's a valley, it's a river. Both Grüne Veltliner and Riesling are done famously well here. The Hiedler winery is also just Ludwig Senior, because there's a Ludwig Junior. You know, he's really driven vineyard classification and the DAC in Austria for the last 25 years. He's really important. For not to totally confuse everybody, but there is what's called Erste Lage, or first growth, in Austria to classify the best vineyards. And in Germany, and I shouldn't even go there, because the Germans are masters at making simple things complex. Because remember, once a time the Germans had Erste Lage, and now it's Große Lage. So all they just wipe that slate clean. And just to say that Hiedler is important for, you know, several vineyard designated Grüne Veltliners and Riesling. This particular wine is a blend of several top vineyards. To me, it's one of the great values in Austrian Riesling year in and year out. It's really a name to look for. And for those of you who are restaurant buyers, this is a wine to look for Austrian wine, but especially Austrian Riesling, because it's a really good value. And this is, I don't know about you, Evan, but this is like Thanksgiving wine personified.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. This is your quintessential turkey wine, you know, in terms of bringing out the flavors of the bird and all of that, and can handle all of the slightly sweeter elements that might go around, whether you've got your sweet potatoes or your cranberries and the acid there. I'm particularly happy that we show this wine because, you know, people think Austria and all they think about is Grüne Veltliner, and it really is a loss to me that you overlook the extraordinary Rieslings that this country is capable of producing, of which Hiedler, to your point, is always a great example. What's interesting here, and maybe you could talk a little bit, Tim, about where that sort of diesel-y, petrol-y thing comes from, is, and the reason why I asked you the first question is Alvarinho or Albarino loosely translates locally to wine of the Rhine or white of the Rhine. So there was a theory for a long time that Albarino was actually transported Riesling, which it clearly isn't, and all of that, but there's enough similarities in terms of some of the orchard fruits and things that you talked about before that led people to think that it might be. And I think one of the big differences in why it clearly doesn't show it is I have never had any Alvarinho or Albarino that truly showed any of that petrol diesel thing, which we do find, to your point, in Austria, and we find it in Germany, and we find it as the wines get older from the Riesling grape in France.
Yeah, it's okay. So if we have to talk about the petrol thing, I have to be Inigo Montoya and sum up. Okay, so it is a compound that was discovered by German scientists in 2006. It's called TDN for short, as in T for Tim, D for David, N for Nancy. So TDN, it's 1,1,6-dimethyl 1,2-dihydronaphthalene. It's a precursor of a carotenoid, vitamin A. And it's in trace amounts in all wine, but in Riesling, particularly Riesling grown in places that have a warmer, shorter growing cycle, and here you should think about Alsace in Australia, it really comes out strongly. Here, not so much. And I think here it's just a matter of age. There are lots of questions surrounding it. How come in a case of Riesling, it doesn't develop evenly bottle to bottle? It just doesn't. And I don't think scientists know why. But to me, it's definitely an impact compound that you look for in non-fruit, in white wines. And if you find it, it should take you to Riesling. It can also be found sometimes in old Grüne Veltliners, and for that matter, old Alsace Gewürztraminer and Pinot Gris. But usually if the wines are 10 years or older. So I hope I didn't.
Yeah, no, I thought that was a brilliant summarization of it. The only other time I've seen it, not to keep taking us back to Portugal, but I'm going to take you back to Portugal, is you do see it in aged Arinto as well. When Arinto ages in Bucelas, notably to a lesser degree as Pedernà in the north, in the Minho and around the Douro, it too can exhibit some of those petrol things, but not nearly as vividly and as clearly as it does in your point in Riesling. So this is another cool shot.
Yeah, here's back to the Hiedler winery, and of course they're 100% sustainable. They farm organically. They don't farm biodynamically. And just a short, a little bit about that. Farming biodynamically, number one, is expensive, and number two, it's really difficult to do if the vineyards are steep. And number three, in a place where you have, wet springs, cold wet springs, and the threat of mold and fungal then you've really got to respond quickly in your vineyards, or else there's big trouble. In which case, that's where people need the flexibility. So you will see in a lot of places like Burgundy or Alsace, where the vineyards are fairly flat, you see a lot more biodynamic producers just because it's practical and it doesn't cost a fortune to do. That is not to say you want to do the best job as a vineyard owner of taking care of your vines. And to me, that's a way of doing it. So just a shout out to Debbie Giaquindo. Yes, Debbie, some brilliant Rieslings are made in the Finger Lakes, and you do pick up some petrol in those wines. I did a great tasting at Fox Run a few years ago and was just really impressed with the wines.
Evan is going to just breeze through the next couple of slides to show the winery, and then we're going to get on to wine number 3.
There was just one slide.
Awesome. Thank you. All right, let's go.
Thank you, Tim. And again, some nuances, but clearly some old world wines, a lot of terroir driven, different pronunciations of fruit, florals, non-earth sorts of things. And let's move into wine 3. So wine 3 is a horse of another color, as it were. And right off the bat, when you look at the wine, you'll notice that the color is a tad darker. And as we know, when you get darkness in wines, it's usually one of 3 things. One, it can be skin contact, because when you are in the contact with the skins, you'll pick up color and leaching, and that can make a wine darker. 2, it could be an older wine, because as we know, when white wines get darker, oftentimes it's because they are older. And again, if you think about any fruit, let's take an apple or a banana, if you cut it, the fruit's white. If you leave it on your counter for 20 or 30 minutes, it gradually turns brown. Grapes and wine do the same thing. Obviously, it takes a much longer time to do it. And the third reason you might get darker color would be the presence of oak barrels. Oak will add a richness to color as well. All we're doing is looking at this wine right now, so I'm not going to guess as to why, but I certainly notice a dark, almost sort of like a light gold type color to it. The viscosity on the wine, sort of moderate, seems to be tearing a little bit heavier and slower than the first 2 wines. So I'm going to keep that in my mind. And then as I go to smell the wine, right off the bat, I do actually get things that suggest oak to me here. And here right off the bat, I'm getting some marzipan. I'm getting a little bit of vanilla. I'm getting a little bit of toastiness to it. I'm getting a little bit of almost a sort of graham crackery Nella wafer kind of character. There is fruit here, and there is a lot of fruit, and it's quite ripe. I'm getting citrus elements here, but rather than getting like lemon fruit or lemon or orange fruit or something, it's a little riper. It's almost more like marmalade, or it's a little bit more like lemon curd or tangerine or tangerine curd or something like that. Very strong. I'm also getting some tropical character here. And that comes off in the thing of like those little Dole rounds that you get when you get a can, you crack them in the middle and they all look like donuts, but they're actually pineapple, and then you can throw them on the grill. I'm getting a little bit of green melon. I'm getting a touch of almost a, maybe even a little bit of orange melon too, something cantaloupe. Definitely floral in that sort of citrus blossom, apple blossomy kind of vein, a little bit of white flowers in general, but not so super high end that floral is the driver of the thing. I think it's really about the fruit and the oak here. Other elements I'm getting, you know, if you ask yourself about non-fruits, herbal here, definitely picking up some sort of light leafy sort of thing, maybe a touch of bay leaf underneath there. Maybe there's a touch of chamomile as well too, like you might find in the tea. And yeah, just some interesting elements there. I'm also picking up some slightly vegetable notes here, not in a negative way, but almost like probably because I'm melancholy that the season over is when you get that first fresh corn of the season from Brentwood here in California, and you literally rip it off the stalk and you throw it in a pot of boiling water for about 30 or 40 seconds, and you bite into it. It gives you sort of a sweetness to it, and I picked that up here, and that's usually something I associate with combination of fruit and with oak. Earthiness here, maybe a little bit of turned dirt, maybe a little bit of fresh earth, but nothing that would suggest to me strong minerals or anything like that. I'm not getting minerality, I'm not getting stoniness, I'm not getting any salinity or anything like that, but I am getting a sense of sort of more organic, rich earth flavors. And on that note, let's taste. Right off the bat, the wine is dry. The acid levels here are medium plus, pushing high, but probably higher than you think because the weight of this wine, which is medium full to fuller in body, needs to be held up by something so as not to come off as clunky. And what holds it up in the house of wine is acidity in this case. So I actually think that the acidity is probably higher than you may think it is by virtue of appearance. The texture of the wine is round, it's quite creamy, it's, dare I say, a little bit buttery, although not like in that sort of super diacetylic buttered popcorn thing. All of those sort of nuttier, marzipan-y characters that we smelled before are clearly present in the palate as well. The finish on the wine is quite long. And also, I might add, quite expansive, which is to say, after I swallow it, not only can I count 1, 1,000, 2, 1,000, 3, but I'm getting a lot more complexity of things going on in the mouth afterwards. I think the quality of this wine is actually quite high, and I think it is a superb example of what it should be. Just a lovely, lovely glass of vino.
So any guesses, guys, out there on chat? Love to see what you guys are thinking. Definitely a very different wine in wine number 3 than wine number 1 and 2. So go where we haven't been, I guess, is a good hint.
Personality wise, grape wise, vinification wise, this is a wine to me that feels that it's been more, I don't want to say it's not manipulated, but there's more of the hand of a winemaker here in several of the choices that have been made, whereas the first 2 wines seem to me to have come off really preserving what Mother Nature has given you, and then doing a few other things, like, you know, the choice of skin contact or lees contact is a choice, but nevertheless, it's still really much about the fruit here. Here, I sort of feel artistry in the glass.
Yeah. All right.
Should we see where we are? All right, we're
it.
going to start off, if I remember, Tim, we were in
Österreich.
Österreich. And now we are going where? We are hopping up. Does anyone else get dizzy when that happens? I get dizzy. Oh, no, I'm really dizzy. And now we're going to pop down into California, into the Poseidon Vineyard, into the Carneros of California. And what you can see clearly there in the background is the Napa River. And in this case, where the Napa River comes in confluence with the San Pablo Bay to take you to an area that we know of as the Carneros. And the Poseidon Vineyard, which was literally planted back in 1973 by the Molnar family, is, in my opinion, along with like Winery Lake and a couple of others, one of the most iconic vineyards in all of the Carneros. So you can see here where we are in California. There, we're north of San Francisco. If you look really carefully there on that little nub that is the San Francisco Peninsula, and you squint, you can see my house. Look at that. How cool. Just joking. Thank you for laughing, Tim. But we move north, and the Carneros is literally the closest appellation to the city of San Francisco, because I can actually be at this vineyard from my house in less than an hour, because it is literally the northern part. If you see the bay there in between what is Marin County on the east, and then there's that, rather on the west, the bay there, the continuation of the San Pablo Bay there, and then you see where Carneros is, and then if you move and follow the arrow to the right, you can literally see the Carneros at that sort of northern end, or the northern end of the San Pablo Bay, right by the water. Cool, clearly maritime by nature and affected by what it is. So what do they grow in Carneros? Well, they grow a lot of Pinot Noir, but they also grow a lot of Chardonnay. And that's what this wine is. And I hope this wine spoke to you as Chardonnay. To me, it showed not only as classically Chardonnay, but well-made Chardonnay. And comes back to the comment I said earlier, which is Chardonnay itself is a relatively blank canvas. And the winemaker can put his or her signature by virtue of oak, by virtue of malolactic, by virtue of lees contact, by virtue of the level of toasting of said oak, the size of the oak, the age of the oak. So it's really more hand than the other varieties we had, as much as it is land. Tim, your thoughts on this wine?
Well, I think you just, filled in all the blanks there, because again, this has the holy trinity of, malolactic, lees contact, and oak. And this is just an utterly delicious wine. I think, we wine geek types, we tend to forget about wines like this, but the restraint and the balance is just about perfect. I mean, it's such a delicious wine. And to your point, the acid is elevated enough that this is, just so food friendly. So those of you who are reading comments, not so easy. I mean, again, this particular wine, you're focusing on the oak, least contact, and the malolactic. But now, what you should do is go back and taste it against the Riesling, because then you're going to get a jarring comparison between old and new world. You're going to get a wine with no oak, with higher acid, with a very profound mineral component to it, and versus this wine with there's little minerality to it. The alcohol's higher, the acid is elevated, but it's less, but you've got oak and malolactic and lees. So yeah, it's a good A/B comparison.
Yeah. What I love about this, and here's a picture of the vineyard there. There's no boat though in the background. Tim, what the hell's going on there? Poseidon adventure? No, okay. What I love about this wine is it's also so classic to me of what the fruit character of the Carneros is all about. So it has some appley things. It's got the tropicality to it. And it's not, what I appreciate about it too, is it's not one that sort of says, I need to embrace this sort of shrill, bright, super electric style that they're making, say, in the West Sonoma coast or down in the South Central coast, which is so-called the New California. This is a step back. This is not sort of that big butterball that they once did in California and that they still do and that people love, but nevertheless puts a tip of the hat towards the fact that when well made, when well applied, that this sort of veneer of malolactic, of oak, et cetera, can be extremely deft and can remind us why people do love, when well done, this style of Chardonnay.
Yeah,
absolutely.
Evan, in your notes in the rationale, for those of you who read Evan's rationale on the kit, one of the things that Evan mentioned was that this particular producer isn't using French barrels, but using Hungarian oak. That was actually the picture that was on the label of their Master Cooper, which I thought was really super cool.
Yeah. And Hungarian oak, lest that those of you who go, things need to be in French oak, or in this day and age, French coopered American oak, lest I remind you that originally, before the Iron Curtain came down, the oak of choice was anywhere from Central Europe. And Hungarian oak, Slovenian oak, et cetera, were much more popular. And it was only when people no longer had access to those oaks that the French people said, well, we have oak trees too, let's start. So now that people have access to these oaks again, you're starting to see a lot more Central European oak come into play.
Great.
And here's a picture of the Molnars, and they're a great family. And they make also, by the way, if you haven't had their Cabernet before, from up in Lake County, from the Red Hills, that is a superb wine, very much under the radar. But these people should get a lot of love. They're doing a terrific job across the board.
Yeah, I'm a big fan. That Cabernet you mentioned, Evan, is one of the great values in California Cabernet, if such a thing exists.
Yeah, increasingly less so in our friends with the Napa Valley. So let's go to wine 4, Tim.
Okay, so first red wine, and everybody, those of you that have the kits, why don't you take a look at the colors on the 3 glasses of red wines. So one of these things is definitely not like the other. So this wine, especially compared to glass 6, the color is much lighter. And if that's the case, then you might be thinking, at least I am, a thinner skinned grape, which more often than not is grown in a cooler climate that's dominated by red fruit that has less alcohol and higher acid. We're going to see if those are true, because as soon as we put our nose in the glass, we'll find out. In terms of what the wine actually looks like, this is kind of a medium ruby red color. It fades out to a lighter ruby or a pink. So the wine is fairly young. What else about it? There's really no staining of the tears, although the wine is pretty substantial in the glass. And the cause of that either could be alcohol or some fancy thing called dry extract, which is just the weight, the density of the wine. Okay. And yeah, the viscosity, or whatever you want to call that, it's beyond medium plus, and it's almost high. So this is very deceptive. And now I'm going to suspect fruit ripeness and alcohol to see if they're elevated. So yes, both suspicions are true. So the wine is clean. It's really well made. A wide range of fruit, most of it ripe. There's very ripe bean cherry and strawberry, a tiny bit of black fruit like blackberry or black plum, but then there's sour fruit like cranberry or pomegranate in there as well. And again, the ripeness is really ripe, pushing raisination to tart. And we'll see how that figures out on the palate. In terms of non-fruit, there's rose petals, really pretty, above the glass. There's herbal qualities, to me, black tea, kind of California bay laurel comes into play. There's also a little bit of orange rind, you know, dry peel. It reminds me of Constant Comment tea. And from there, there's, again, other herbal, green herbal type aromas. There's really not much in the way of earth or mineral. There is a, you know, a dusty or humusy quality to the wine, but really there's not much of that to speak of. So here, fruit drives the wine, but also there's quite a bit of oak influence. So I'd say there's a moderate use of oak. It's probably a mix of used and new. It makes itself known in the form of vanilla and some brown spices, some bitter chocolate, kind of coffee, and clovey, allspice, things like that. Okay, and then on the palate. Well, that's yummy, if we can use a technical term. All right. Very, you know, it's like an adult sweet tart. So it's got the combination of ripe red and black fruit and really tart red fruit. And it's more savory. That California bay laurel and black tea thing come up on the palate. More oak influence, really spicy, but I love the balance, the way that the oak is married into the overall balance of the wine. Again, I just have to point out that earth and mineral really don't play a big thing here. So it's literally the fruit and the quality of the fruit versus some really deft use of oak. In terms of the structure, what is surprising to me about the wine is that the alcohol is elevated. I think the alcohol here feels like it's right around for 14%. The acid is medium plus, but it doesn't taste or feel adjusted. So this is really, you know, a great example of a balanced vineyard and harvesting when you've got fruit that's evenly ripe, as opposed to some that's overly ripe and some that's, well, green or just underripe. Great oak. What else about it? The tannins are moderate, they're polished. That speaks again to fruit that is ripened, but also, you know, a mix of used, new, and oak together. And then finally, the finish is really long and persistent. This is really high quality wine and delicious. And Evan, I seem to, well, I'll save this line for in a bit. What do you have for any color commentary for this? What do you think?
I think you nailed it. I don't have a lot to add, and we'll talk about it more when we find out exactly what it is, but I think it speaks very much to exactly what it is by grape, and to the extent that our friends out there are familiar with the place, you'll nod your head as well when you do it. But very deft winemaking, once again, nice understanding of the balance between oak and fruit, strong personality within that fruit. And right off the bat, the one thing that speaks to me here is the quality of the farming, the quality of the viticulture. I mean, they've got just beautifully pristine examples of the fruit here. It's good stuff. So we check out and see where we are. Limeng, you have anything to add before we jump back to where we were?
I'm just amazed at how, you know, how well, how good the guesses are today on Jack. It's pretty amazing. Let's go.
Go ahead, Tim.
Before we reveal, I'm seeing a lot of people, you know, mentioning California Pinot Noir. So everybody who's mentioning, think about the elevated alcohol and where is the warmest place where high quality Pinot Noir is grown and made in California.
And on that note,
you can hone in. We'll give you like 5 to 10 seconds. Where? What
glad you guys can. I can't move slides and watch chat at the same time. I'm just not that coordinated.
Okay.
So great.
Okay.
All right,
let's go ahead and reveal.
Okay, so here we are. Let's remind ourselves where we were. Hello, Molnar family over at Poseidon Vineyard and Obsidian Ridge, and we're going to jump up. For those of you who get car sick like I do, bear with me. And here we go. We go all the way up, and we're staying in California. We're going down, and boom, boom.
Yep.
Here we are at the Roar Winery, our good friends, the Franchionis, in the Santa Lucia Highlands.
Yeah, so the Santa Lucia Highlands, which to me, I don't know. It's kind of like the frat party, a place to grow Pinot Noir in California, because it's just wines are just ripe and they're so hedonistic and fun. So Evan, one night, this is many moons ago, I had dinner with Gary Francione and his wife and Gary Pizzoni and his girlfriend.
Oh gosh.
And I'll just have to tell you about it sometime. It was very memorable because they're both such characters. But they're dear friends, and Gary Pizzoni has been a longtime mentor to Gary Francione, and they both make remarkable wines. Yeah. So here we are in the Santa Lucia Highlands. You're inland in Monterey County from the coast, but you still get fog. I mean, Highlands being pretty steep hills that some of the vineyards are planted on. So there definitely is fog in the mornings, but when it burns off, the place is actually quite warm. So hence the ripening, the elevated alcohol, the fruit character, and the delicious factor too, I'd have to add.
Yeah, no, they do just such an extraordinary job. And I think that, when we do talk about the Highlands, we talk about the importance of the Pizzonis, the Francionis. For those of you who know of Steve McIntyre, really the godfather of viticulture in that part of the world. It's sort of, I think of it almost as like one of California's best kept secrets. And I know a lot of people would like to know more, but there's not a lot of wine. I mean, first of all, there's not a lot of wineries there, which is why more people don't come there. You're in the middle of the, Salinas Valley off to the east there, and it's really as much vegetable and row vegetable country as it is for wines. But there is that little strip of the Highlands, which literally, it reminds me a bit of driving down, the Route Nationale 74 in Burgundy, and you're looking off there as you're driving down River Road. You look off to the right-hand side on these sort of slopes, and all you see are these incredible vineyards. Obviously, higher slopes in Burgundy, but just some extraordinarily iconic wines, riper style. To your point, Tim. And I actually was delighted. I was down visiting in the Santa Lucia Highlands, having lunch with Nick and Gary Francione and Adam Francione. And we talked about this, and then we were talking about Master of the World, and they're like, oh, we got to be, this sounds so cool. And not only did they ask me if I'd be interested in showing some of their wines in Master of the World, to which I was like, when, because the wines are obviously not the easiest to get a hold of. They are on allocation oftentimes. But Nick on the spot bought a subscription. He said, I'm going to be in on this because, we don't get a lot of wine down here, being in the middle of, freaking nowhere. So he's become a annual subscriber as well. And we're big fans of him, big fans of his wine. This gives you a flavor. You can see, again, that's sort of the shot on the left-hand side sort of gives you the sense of the Highlands in the background. Nice view. I'm looking sort of north to southish on the other side, and they just great people, great wines.
So a couple of thoughts from the chat here. First of all, Santa Lucia Islands, guys, is not Central Valley. Evan, can you just distinguish? As the crow flies, it may seem close by, but it's totally different. So Santa Lucia Islands is not where bulk wine.
No, you're literally in Monterey County. Now, Monterey County is obviously a very important agricultural region for California, but it's very much towards the water. And in fact, the influence that Tim spoke about of the fog and the breezes is literally a direct offshoot of being pulled in from the Pacific Ocean. So you are right against the water, essentially, whereas the Central Valley, you need to hop over. I guess that would be the Gavilan Mountains on the other side and go much further inland to get there. And it would be infinitely hotter. It's way too warm to produce Pinot Noir of Pinot Noir nuance in the Central Valley. I mean, they make a lot of Pinot Noir there, but it's not necessarily as memorable as something like this. Although in the afternoons, they do get enough sun to not only ripen fruit, but also to allow things to go. But people forget about this area is you get this wind that comes in at about 2 p.m. So they get most of their sunlight in the morning, gets cooler as the day goes on, and it gives for a much longer, prolonged growing season so that you get not only development of fruit flavors and development of sugar, but it all comes together in this incredibly balanced package.
Yeah. And here's another question, Tim, for you on Gamay versus Pinot.
Yeah.
Can you explain a little bit more Gamay versus Pinot? Why was this not Gamay?
Sure. Debbie, I was just going to talk about that. So, if we're going classic wines to learn about, and if we're talking about Gamay, we're probably talking about Beaujolais Village. And if that's the case, there are lots of things that are different. One, the place is much cooler, so you won't have a wine beyond 13% alcohol. So, and you're going to have much higher acid. But the most important thing is that you've got carbonic maceration and semi-carbonic. So you've got a wine that smells like, tropical fruit punch or bananas or Jolly Rancher candy. There's a very candied aspect to the fruit. And then even with a Beaujolais Village, most of the time you've got a pretty profound sense of granite, hard mineral quality to it, and a stemmy quality, because if you're fermenting whole clusters of grapes, you got stems. And if you got stems in a fermentation, you've got that stem tannin. This wine doesn't have any of those things. It's very ripe. It's almost voluptuous, and it's just balanced. And to me, the complexity is clearly Pinot. So, tomorrow, isn't it tomorrow, Nouveau Beaujolais Day? I believe it is, isn't it? So Debbie, you might go out and buy a bottle. And then if you've still got some of this, just crack the Nouveau Beaujolais and taste it next to it. It's a pretty stark contrast of two styles.
Absolutely.
Great. One last question before we move to the next wine. Alcohol. Did you guys feel like the alcohol was high and overbalanced, or is it balanced despite being higher?
I think it's balanced and it's high, and everybody, and again, this is going down a rabbit hole, and Evan, feel free to chime in. Context is a huge thing. I mean, this is really high quality Pinot Noir grown by someone who knows what they're doing, and really high quality winemaking. So this is a riper style of Pinot Noir. It's absolutely delicious, and I would never, ever turn this wine down, okay? Yeah, it's not as restrained. The acid's not as high. Maybe other Pinot Noirs, other cooler places are more complex, but the complexity thing isn't everything. The delicious factor is big too.
Yeah,
that's my humble opinion.
I would just chime in that it's definitely got more volume on it than a lot of other Pinot Noirs do. It's not literally sitting there at, again, the sort of West Sonoma Coast, Petaluma Gap, Santa Rita Hills, adjacent to the water, see the vineyards literally from, or the ocean literally from the vineyards. But there's a place for everything. And what I always look for is balance. And to me, the wine, although it is definitely a bigger style, it doesn't come off to me as being hot. It doesn't, the first thing I say isn't like, ooh, the alcohol's burning my nose here. It's just a generous style of wine. It's kind of like when you sit down and you have a glass of, I don't know, Carlisle or Bedrock Zinfandel, and you say, oh, it's a delicious wine. Then you look at the label and it's like 16% alcohol, right? There's a sense to prejudge something, which is why we taste blind, without necessarily judging its balance. This is a big style, but it's balanced. And the Franchonis, you can see Gary there, second from the right, and his family are just literally among some of the most amazing people that you'll meet. And if you know the people, you'll understand the vineyards, you'll understand everything else. So, okay, let's move on to wine 5. Wine 5, as Tim said, sort of split the difference. For those of you who do have the wine kit in front of you or tasting the wines with us, between the color of wine 4 and the color of wine 6. It is a semi-translucent color. It's more sort of in that kind of ruby, with sort of a slightly faded ruby color on the edge, which leads me to believe that maybe it's starting to show a little bit of development. That's colors day bright. Obviously, when you have deeper pigmentation, the pigment absorbs the light, so you're rarely going to get red wines that are, if you will, star bright or brilliant or anything like that. But nevertheless, I can read through it here as I'm looking at some paperwork down below. And I swirl the wine around. The viscosity is not nearly as rich as the wine we just came off. The tears drop faster. They're thinner, which suggests to me that probably it's not quite as big, at least in terms of volume and alcohol, as the wine that we had before, even though the color itself is a bit darker. In the nose, right off the bat, I'm getting a nice combination of sort of ripe and slightly underripe characters of fruit, which suggests to me that maybe you're picking from different vineyards and not necessarily all at the same time on the same day. I think the fruit nature is both red and slightly black, probably more red than black, with plums and cherries. There are elements of oak here that I'm picking up that come off as sort of like coffee, mocha, beans. I'm picking up some earthy elements that suggest to me like porcini, both dried and fresh, maybe a little bit truffly. There's a soft I don't want to say almost like tobacco-y or again, sagey sort of character, something leafy, something herbal there. Rose petals, again, not in a different way. Not all roses smell the same. If you walk through the rose garden in San Francisco, you know that as you go to smell the roses, each one has a different aroma. But this has sort of like a dried, crushed rose petal character, sort of a red thing going on to it. And as far as the earthiness there, yes, I'm picking up some of that porcini-ish truffly thing, but there's also sort of a dried earth character. There's a slightly sort of minerally kind of character too. The vine, if you can say this, it smells old. It smells, there's a rusticity to it. There's an oldness to it. There's a, dare I say, slightly leathery, suede-like character to it that pronounces itself. And again, maybe even just the lightest little note of like pepperiness or spices, savory spices, maybe a kiss of fennel or something like that. There's a hell of a lot going on in that little glass of wine. In terms of the structure and the mouth, the wine is dry. The acid level is medium plus, sort of surprisingly high. Not as it's more refreshing in the palate than suggesting tartness on the nose, although all of those elements of red and black fruits are confirmed in the palate. Palate itself is actually quite refreshing. And again, sort of a combination of both ripe primary fruits, but also some evolving, developing vinosity and maturity in the glass. As far as the tannins go, they're slightly grittier than what we had before in the other glass, which suggests maybe either different grapes or fruit that's not nearly as ripe as what we had before. Although the tannin management on them is well done, it pulls at my tongue, it pulls at my cheeks, but it doesn't make me look like something out of a bad Star Trek rerun. And the wine has got great length and great flavor to it. Just a delightful glass of wine, and one that's, for even more so, craves food. I would love a dish. I drink this wine and I want a plate of something next to me. It's very much of a, what the French calls those gastronomic wines, right? That it needs some food to bring it out. Really, really tasty stuff. Wayman, anything?
But some old world. For those who are pointing to old world, I guess the question is, what is helping people point themselves to old world here?
I think it's a combination of it not being a fruit bomb, not being overly alcoholic, the oak on it being deft and not as nearly as pronounced. You go back to wine 3, our Chardonnay, or the Pinot that we just came off of, the impression of oak is a little bit more in the forefront. Here, it's a little bit more in the background. And again, you do get these sort of both organic and inorganic earth elements that actually step in front, in my opinion, of the fruit, which plays a more subdued role. Oftentimes in New World wines, unless you're in super cool climate areas, you're going to find that to be sort of the general formula.
Great. We've got everything from Bordeaux to Rhone to Italy. So, Evan, I think that it'd be interesting to see where you take us.
Yeah, I'm enjoying. But by the way, this wine, as you swirl it, keeps changing and changing and changing. So keep your eyes on the prize, keep your nose in the glass. Let's see where we are. We're down it with our friends. Goodbye, Francione family. We love you dearly. And we are going to head off. Get ready, get rowdy. And back in the air. Back up, no longer in California. No longer in the United States. And we're back to the old world. We're popping ourselves down in the land of Tuscany, specifically not too far out of Castellina in Chianti, slightly higher up, overlooking Siena. You could see it in the far background, but it's just too far away with Google Earth. And we are at Castello di Fonterotoli in Chianti. And just a lovely family, the Mazzei family, making wine since, I don't know, what, Tim, 1435, something like that. So they're newbies on the block. And doing just a lovely job. So just a reminder for those of you who we are, Chianti and Tuscany are what we would consider central Italian, as opposed to Piemonte, driven by the Nebbiolo grape. Central Italy is always going to be driven by the Sangiovese grape. And then as we move further south towards Naples, the grape of choice there for pedigree, of course, is the Aglianico grape. But here we are, deep, truly in the heart of Chianti and Castellina, of Chianti. This wine is obviously made from Sangiovese, but it's a blend. Many times, and certainly the classic Chianti rules, not just for Chianti Classico, but the classic Chianti rules, Classico, of course, meaning the heart of the region rather than the style of the wine, suggests that the wines have traditionally been blended. And it wasn't until just a few years ago that they actually allowed by law a wine to be made purely from Sangiovese and labeled as Chianti Classico. It used to have other grapes blended in it. This one happens to be 90% Sangiovese, 10% other complementary grapes, which could be Colorino, could be white grapes, Malvasia, Trebbiano, etc. But in this case, it's a assemblage of a couple of other grapes there. Legally today, you can even put small amounts of Cabernet and stuff like that in it and still call it Chianti Classico. All this is all traditional Italian grapes there. It's a deft hand. It shows beautiful structure. Their vines date back probably between about 30 and, well, about 15 and 30 years here. And it's a selection of about 5 different plots from the 120 plots that they own over 290 acres of vineyards, over the 1,600 acres of land that they have. And to me, it's a benchmark. It's a go-to. I think the people from Fonterutoli do a very good job year in and year out and just make lovely wine. Tim?
Yep. Well, yeah, I can only agree. I mean, this is quintessential Chianti Classico, and everyone listening, we need to make that distinction that, you know, there is Chianti, which is 7 other zones within Tuscany, and then there's Chianti Classico, the original, and what's considered the heart. And there are 2 different consortios, and you better not say the wrong thing in front of each other because they don't like each other. And Chianti Classico is much more, it's a machine, it's well-funded. They have an amazing, you know, consortio center and research, and the Chianti Classico project 2000, which was an over 30-year project, ended up making the Chianti Classico wines probably the most improved wines in Italy in the last 25 years. This is one of my favorite producers. For those of you who tasted this and wanted to go to the Rhone is a much warmer place. And if this were Grenache and the same color, the alcohol would be a whole percentage higher. You would have a lot of savory type things like pepper and, you know, roasted meat and things like that, and less acid. This, when you put it on your palate, is kind of a shock. It's a little strict. It requires your attention. The acid is higher and you've got grape tannin for the first time, right? And a star anise quality, sour fruit, and a sour cherry pit finish. Sandalwood and savory, and just this is quintessential Chianti Classico. It's wonderful wine.
So Tim, there is a question here from Akeem. He thought it was Nebbiolo because of the tannins and the acidity that you're mentioning for the Chianti. So Nebbiolo versus Sangiovese.
Yeah, well, I'll take a shot at that, and Evan, probably you too. I think the color's not advanced or oxidized enough, and frankly, believe it or not, it's not tannic enough or acidic enough. And Nebbiolo to me is usually very floral, and this wine is not. So I think we're coming off the Hello Kitty feeling of the Pinot Noir. And so the tannin and the acid may seem extreme to you, but believe it or not, it's not really. So.
Yeah, I would just add that Nebbiolo, if one had the opportunity, and Akeem, if you actually happen to have anything Nebbiolo and Nebbiolo d'Alba or whatever nearby that you wanted to compare it to, Nebbiolo is just downright mean. You know, Sangiovese has sort of an approachability. Yes, it's got some grip. Yes, it's got some astringency. Yes, it has acid. But, you know, compared to the Tasmanian devil that is Nebbiolo, nothing in comparison. So for this to be, you know, if this were the Sangiovese Grosso clone and you were in Brunello, maybe there's a little bit more corollary there. But here, this is just sort of classically Tuscan, be it Chianti, be it Vino Nobile, be it Morellino, that sort of style of that medium body without the anger and angst of Nebbiolo.
Yeah, and Akeem, you make a good comment. You know, you'd have to get a Barbaresco or Barolo 10 or 12 or 14 years to get it to be this friendly. Even though they're using rotary fermenters and some of them are using small barrels, the wines are still just really powerful, you know.
Yeah.
But
And
good
there's another
comments.
shot of these people clearly have Bordeaux envy, don't they, Tim?
I know, I was gonna say.
Well, yeah, but
what
you know, let's face
what a
it,
beautiful.
we're talking serious Italian design here, and nobody does design better than the Italians. I mean, that's beautiful.
Yeah.
Wow.
CCC. All right. So with that, let's move to our last wine, Tim.
Okay, so everybody now truly for something different. Notice the depth of color in wine 6. Yeah. So this is opaque ruby with purple. And notice the color of the edge of the rim. It's magenta or even a light purple color. So whatever this is a thicker skinned, much more deeply pigmented grape. Yeah. And it stains the glass. What else about it? Yeah, that's about it. And the viscosity, et cetera, is high. So we've got a really pretty rich, robust wine here. And then on the nose, yeah, well, all those things are true. So we've got a much deeper selection of fruits. So it's predominantly black. So black cherry, blackberry, black plum. There's also blue fruit, blueberry. And then there's very ripe red fruit. And I'll want to see how all that translates in terms of fruit quality. Most of it being really ripe, almost liqueur. It's almost like blueberry liqueur. And then on the palate, I want to see if there's any tart fruit. I wouldn't be surprised. Other things, it smells like violet. There's a little dark earth quality, but there's herbal things. There's green herbal things. There's it reminds me just of a mix of freshly picked, herbs. There's a little bit of bell pepper in there. And then what's left, this black licorice that just popped on there. And then things like oak influence, espresso beans and cocoa powder and some slight spice. But here, just really dense, powerful fruit for the wine. Okay, and then on the palate. Okay, so Akeem, this has a lot of tannin. And it's mostly grape tannin, but there's also quite a bit of oak tannin. All right, so I've skipped everything. The fruit, there is more tart fruit on this, but it's still predominantly very ripe, black and blue fruit. There's more of a green quality, herbal quality. There's a little bit of mint to it on the palate that I didn't get on the nose. The earth and mineral character is really minimal here. What there is quite a bit of oak, and there needs to be to match the powerful intensity of the fruit of the wine and the tannins. And here I think oak is going to do this wine some favor because it has so much grape tannin in it. What else? The structure, alcohol is high. Tannin, if not high, is very close to being high. The acid is medium plus, which is curious, which makes me think the wine was probably acidulated, which is perfectly okay and done quite a bit. And what else? The finish is long, it's powerful. And again, a lack of earth and mineral. And if you're not sure about that as your attorney, I think you should go back and taste the Chianti Classico real quick. Go back and taste it real quick. And you'll see how profoundly earthy it is compared to this one. Okay. Evan, what do you think? Thoughts?
No, yeah, no, I think that's what's always fun tasting with you, and in spirit, Madeline, as well too, because you guys are such brilliant tasters and you're so stealth, laser focused with your descriptors. I pick up on everything you said. I'm really picking up on some of those licorice and fennel-y things you talked about before. I think that there is a big, there is a nice presence and a balance there. The fruit on this is beautifully ripe, but not overripe. It pushes the edge without turning into fruit leather or something like that. There are some other interesting herbal notes to it as well too. I'm getting sort of almost a slightly, maybe dare I say, like a sarsaparilla or a rudi sort of thing there. There are some sort of dark mushroomy characters, but not in that old world sense, more in the sort of sweetness that mushrooms can bring, in that sort of more humusy sense. And just the fruit character is beautiful. I am loving this combination of the black and blue fruit together, enveloped in this wonderful package. The tannins, I think, are ample, to your point, but they're very well managed. If the tannins showed any astringency based on the volume that we have, we would all be turning into prunes right now because it would be drying so much, and you don't get that with this wine. I think it's a lovely, well-made wine. Li Meng, anything before we go back and get back on the
I just love Lisa's
roller
comment
coaster
that
ride?
I just love Lisa's comment that it's she's got like Jim Carrey's mouth right now in The Mask. I love it.
There's a lot of great
Cabernet.
movies.
We got a guess for Cabernet. So let's see, Evan. Let's go.
All right, let's jump here. Let's get back. Let's remind ourselves where we were. Ciao, Italia. Ciao, Bella. And off we go. And boom, we're up in the air. Oh, we're back and we're leaving Italy and we're coming back to the United States. But are we in California? No, we are in Washington State. And with the fabulous team at Two Vintners and the fabulous Morgan Lee, who I will say, spoiler alert, is one of my dearest friends up in Washington and a really talented winemaker too. And this is his property and doing some
love
great
seeing
things.
the river back there, how close this
to
property
the Yakima River.
Yeah,
absolutely.
Yeah. So this is they're Two Vintners. They call it legit Cabernet. And, you know, spending some time on the website, you know, they have a lot of great names for their wines. In particular, they have a Riesling called Waiting List because they had to wait 7 years to get the grapes. And then they have a wine called Lola that's named after the winery dog. And I'm thinking every winery should have a wine named after the dog or the cat, right? What's intriguing to me about this is that there's 10% Petite Syrah. And that adds the blue fruit character, and that adds the tannin, that really bitter black licorice character to the finish and some of the tannin, but it really gives the wine structure, and it really, I think, is a perfect foil to all that luscious fruit. So, yeah, great stuff.
Yeah, I love what they do in Washington, just because they're able to pull together, you know, obviously this wonderful ripe fruit. And for those of you who haven't spent time out in the Columbia Valley, you know, it's essentially a high desert, you know, because again, you've got the Cascade Mountains providing the rain shadow there, and everything is irrigated and needs to be, because if not, it would dry out. But you get incredible ripeness. And again, Columbia Valley is not monolithic. You can pull off Red Mountain, you can pull off the hills of the Rattlesnake Hills and all that. And you can pull from Walla Walla, again, Walla Walla being technically part of the Columbia Valley as well too. And he sort of exploits the volume of the wine, adds that Petite Syrah in, which could make the wine mean. Petite Syrah, you know, is right up there with Nebbiolo for being a mean grape, but he envelops it with a judicious amount of oak. For those of you who are unfamiliar with Two Vintners, take a little bit of time out there and go into cyberspace and check it out. Morgan is a rock star up there. The winery is sort of semi-cult. They have the coolest tasting room in sort of like a garage area of where I'm sitting here drawing a blank, the primary city where Chateau Saint Michel is. Help me, Tim. Woodinville. I knew it was a ville. I was going to say McMinnville, and I knew I was in Oregon. But Woodinville, you know, quietly has several hundred tasting rooms available, a stone's throw outside of Seattle, so you don't have to schlep all the way out to the Columbia Valley to go see it. And Morgan's got a great tasting room there, and just does a great job. And his wines are highly sought after, allocated, and to your point, playful and cute while at once being serious.
Yeah. Yep. Evan, will you advance the slide so that we can see the label? And then we've got a great question here. I think people forgot Washington. You know, they were going New World. It was very clear to a lot of folks. They were going to Australia, they were going Cali, they're going all these different places, but no one mentioned Washington. So can you talk a little bit? Lisa's got a question. What are some of your favorite Washington producers besides the Two Vintners and Morgan?
Oh, I mean, well, Two Vintners is a lovely one. But boy, who else is out there? You know, out in Walla Walla, you've got people like Woodward Canyon. You've got people like Lake Call 41. You've got people like Gramercy Cellars. You've got, without going to the Oregon side where you have Cayuse and all the crazies making wines out of the rocks. You have people even like, you know, the beauty of it, people like Chateau Saint Michel doing a terrific job with red varieties. You have Mike Janik, who used to be at Saint Michel, who has his own label in Janik. Cadence wines are lovely. You know, our good friend Doug Frost, mutual friend of ours, has Echolands. He's doing a really good job. So don't overlook Washington State as a great alternative out of California. And there's Morgan and there's Lola. Look at that right up there. And this is in the tasting room at Two Vintners. And that picture sort of, that's Morgan. That's kind of the guy who he is. You just let's love each other. But don't overlook the value that's there. I would say even, and the wines are not quote unquote inexpensive by any stretch of the imagination, but they almost exclusively always punch above their weight in terms of what that same amount of money would buy you in, say, Napa Cabernet, or buy you, say, in Sonoma Coast or Paso Robles Rhone blends. Comparatively, they're there. And plus, because the latitude is so far north, they always have this incredible acidity to them, which is, again, natural by virtue of latitude, which is closer to the wine regions of France were in California, more like the latitude of southern Spain and North Africa. So, you know, that's going to be a telltale difference. This is a couple of pictures of some of the vineyards. It really shows you how flat the area is too. A lot of people want to expect these bigger hills there, but you know, places like the top of Red Mountain are about as high as it gets out there in the Columbia Valley. And this is great ag land too. One of the things that makes this area so interesting and different than, say, Napa Valley or some other places is not only are the grapes incredible, but, you know, great hops, for those of you who are beer lovers, come from this part of the world. Some of the world's best apples, potatoes, and vegetables. It's not a monoculture. And one of the reasons why the viticulture is so good here is because the people come from an agricultural bend, sharing more in common, honestly, like our friend Gary Francione in the San Lucia Highlands, because those people not only are growing grapes, they're growing vegetables and row crops and stuff like that. Some of the other Garys are growing other things too, but we won't talk about that here. And they show other stuff like that too. So
we have a comment here from Tim O'Brien that didn't go to everyone. Tim says, "Hi Tim, how are you?" And Tim says that Morgan makes a stunning Grenache Blanc too. So I thought that
really
was
good.
Tim.
Yeah.
And he makes a couple of Syrahs out of Walla Walla that are killer. I think one's called Some Days Are Stones and Some Days Are Diamonds and something like that. But just some excellent wines. And he is a rising star up in that part of the world. The 13th will be it. We will continue to record. So again, not everybody I know who is here today can watch live. So we will still do the recordings of the live sessions and do that. We promise next month, even with the holidays, to have a little bit more time to mingle. After that, I concur with Li Meng that all feedback is good feedback. You know, us switching over to this format of not throwing the grids up there was in large part a lot due to you, because people focus too much on the grid and not as much about talking about the wines. To be able to do that, I think, was something that was helpful, gets a little bit more interesting dialogue going on. And yeah, it's been a hell of a year. I mean, next month will literally mark the end of our second year out there as we go into the holidays, and we really appreciate it. A big shout out again to Angel good job on that WSET, and we look forward to seeing everybody next month. Tim, anything you want to say?
Good job to Debbie, and go ahead, Tim.
Yeah, just happy Thanksgiving, everybody.
Happy Thanksgiving. We hope to see you next month. Enjoy, guys.
Okay.
Be well, everybody. Take good care. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Happy holidays.